Things are pretty crazy in the Labour Party right now. Let's hear what voice of reason Johnathan Pie has to say.
The firing of Rebecca Long-Bailey has reignited the row over anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
No, it never went away. It's always been very much ablaze.
As Keir Starmer battles to keep his party from civil war, the left contingent of the Labour Party threats... Hang on, I'm confused.
Oh, you're confused, are you? Well, I'm glad you admitted it, because I think a lot of people are too proud to admit that they have no idea what this anti-Semitism debate is all about. So it's very big of you to say that. What exactly are you confused about?
It's still such an odd phrase to me. You know, the left-wing contingent of the Labour Party. The whole party is supposed to be fucking left-wing.
Yeah, good point, it is supposed to be left-wing. But what happened was we voted for a left-wing leader, and then the majority of the PLP decided to openly criticise the leadership, and not on particular policies or positions, but simply saying he's unelectable, he's a terrible leader, he hates Jews, or we're heavily implying that at least. And then a number of MPs left, and then it was revealed that much of the senior management team were openly undermining the party's election prospects. They're what we call the right-wing contingent.
Right, but that's not what's confusing me.
Oh, you're not confused about that? Okay.
Okay, where to begin, really? Okay, the left-wing contingent are up in arms, right? That's what's confusing me, okay? Because surely this is what they want, right? If one of your own is getting fired for essentially posting on Twitter an article from The Independent, then you've won.
We've won? Really? Jeremy Corbyn's Prime Minister? There's a socialist government in Downing Street? I don't understand it, but I'm overjoyed at the news.
The culture war is over. Victory!
Oh, the culture war. Right. I see why you're confused now. You think that the left-wing contingent of the Labour Party, that the entire Corbynism project over the last 5 years, was all about winning a culture war.
It's what you've always wanted. People losing their jobs for retweeting the wrong opinions.
Okay, I think what's happened here is that you've confused the goals of the Labour membership, Momentum's membership, and the Labour movement more broadly with the goals of a few Twitter trolls.
Exactly the same people that have their pitchforks primed for any careless slip of the tongue or unthinking moment online. They're up in arms.
Yeah, they're not the same people, you see.
Well, you fucking shouldn't be, because this is the world that you created.
I barely use Twitter. So let's talk about cancel culture. Cancel culture is the all too often toxic campaign to discredit a person's entire political outlook and destroy their career by erasing nuance in their argument and by sifting through everything they've ever said or done and cherry-picking certain actions and comments they've made to build a distorted view of who they are. Who springs to mind as the most victimised person in British political history of this type of campaign? It's Jeremy Corbyn, right? Right? It is. And who conducted these attacks? It wasn't internet trolls. It was the Daily Mail, The Sun, The Telegraph, The Guardian, Panorama.
A culture that entirely rejects the notion of nuanced debate and giving the benefit of the doubt in favour of an assumption of bigotry at every available opportunity.
He's nailed it.
You did this. You created this society whereby a tiny but very vocal minority of perma-offended woke twats with an extraordinary amount of power have penetrated...
By automatically tarring all those who have been critical of RLB's firing, with all those who take part in wokey Twitter mobs, Pie is playing into a larger narrative about Labour's left-wing contingent. It might be hard for Pie to believe, but the grassroots movement that formed around Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was and is much more interested in bringing about socialist reforms and community organising than it is in language policing or cancelling individuals. Over the past 5 years, there has been a concerted effort on the part of many individuals who have large platforms to demonise those who must organise together in order to get their voices heard. You could sum it up in the phrase, the many versus the few, I suppose, although that's a bit trite. You don't want to be that trite. Attempts by constituents to hold their MPs to account has repeatedly been framed as mob justice, while organisations such as Momentum have every offensive and racist comment on political forums ascribed to them, as if there were any way of knowing if the person who made the comment is a member, and if they were, why that has anything to do with the rest of the membership. It's interesting to see that so many of the people that concern themselves with the freedom of speech, with the nuance of debate, with the benefit of the doubt, when it comes to the comments of certain prominent individuals, are very happy to disregard a movement of thousands of people because of a few comments made by individuals who may not even be involved. The political establishment's implicit message is: vote but don't stand, attend but don't participate, listen but don't talk. And since the day Corbyn stood for leader in 2015, they have used every cancel culture trick in the book to discredit the people-powered politics he inspired. There is a kind of doublethink going on here, in which lefty Labour activists are both dismissed as hysterical woke snowflakes and seen as sinister anti-Semitic thugs, just as Corbyn was both a well-intentioned activist who'd gotten way out of his depth, but also a cold and calculating power-hungry ideologue come to destroy everything we the British people hold dear. In actual fact, it is those supposedly calm, rational moderates who have been engaging in woke virtue signalling, in an attempt, and highly successful I have to say up till now, to dismiss, or cancel if you prefer, Corbynism, without ever having to actually address, never mind rebut, its political aims. To illustrate how this has been playing out, I want to look at something that happened in Haringey in 2018, because as it happens, in the same week as RLB being fired, the Conservative MP and Housing Minister Robert Jenrick openly admitted to housing policy being influenced by a party donor. Brazen corruption at the highest level of government. Was he fired? Now, we're all aware that there is a housing crisis in the UK, and that successive governments, both Labour and Conservative, have failed to address the issue. Which leads people to think, well, what can be done about it then? No one's got any answers. It's just neoliberalism, etc, etc. Well, in 2018, Haringey Council overturned the decision to allow a huge new private housing project designed to regenerate an old council estate from going ahead. It was the sort of scheme that we hear about all the time, particularly in London. Expensive apartment blocks designed to attract buy-to-let landlords and foreign investors. Projects that are deeply unpopular with the public as a whole, and certainly with local residents who live in the area. Haringey, like every other borough in London, is in desperate need of council housing and social housing. And of course, a project like this provides neither. The only requirement is a small percentage of affordable housing, and we all know how affordable that is. And there were fears, as you can imagine, that even that percentage of affordable housing was going to be whittled down over time, as it nearly always is, due to a surprise rise in the cost of concrete or something. Now, Ledlease, the company brought in to do the project, gave every assurance that they wouldn't cut the number of affordable flats. However, unsurprisingly, the company had a long history of doing just that.
This is what we do, and we are proud to be recognised for it all over the world.
Now, we read about schemes like this all the time, and we feel there's nothing we can do, right? That's just the way that housing works in this country now. We may sign a petition, we may even go to a protest, but we don't actually expect the council to listen to us. In Haringey, however, local people got together, both at a grassroots level and within local government, and with support from the Labour leadership, were actually able to assert some influence on the decision making. They scrapped the deal, and against all the odds, have since began building council houses. Sounds like a win, right? For local people, for the Labour Party, for Britain, yeah? The story was closely followed by the Evening Standard, and even made national news. Not because it was a great success story, but because it was an explosive rift between the Corbynites and the old Labour, proper Labour people. I would say Blairites, but that's a horrible way of putting it, isn't it? Corbynites is fine, but Blairites, that's just mean. They're the proper Labour. They're just Labour good guys. The good Labour guys. The norm, but not norms in a bad way. Just positive things. So the way the Evening Standard framed it was, newly elected left-wing councillors who had been inspired by Corbyn opposed the scheme, and through sexism and bullying forced long-time supporter of the development, council leader and all-round hard worker Claire Cobber to step down. I don't know if it's Cobber or Cobber, but there we go. Now this poor female, and I stress the word female because that's what the articles are often about, councillor with kids juggling home life and work, was hounded out of the party by a faceless gang of lefties. Maybe they're men, maybe they're women, maybe they don't have a gender identity. But they certainly don't have names, certainly don't have personalities. They're just a faceless mob. Just Corbyn's foot soldiers, I guess. Probably parachuted in from central office. Why did they want to get rid of Claire Cobber? Maybe they were just enraged by her great level-headed counselling.
To the incinerator!
She wasn't of the pure left-wing ideology that they subscribed to, and so she had to be eliminated.
To the incinerator!
Maybe they just hate women.
To the incinerator!
At the same time, Momentum activists, who weren't local, apparently, as if Momentum Central Office ever helped out any local groups, they're all local residents in London, either in that borough or nearby. Anyway, were accused of hopping on the bandwagon of locally organised protest. You can imagine these hooligans in their sportswear with their bicycle chains, what have you. Anyway, what a disaster. What a disaster for democracy. But that's not the whole story. The Guardian interviewed Claire Cobber, and the interviewer was very sympathetic, painting Cobber as this very hard-working, long-time councillor for Haringey, and I'm sure she is in many ways. Anyway, in the interview, with a highly sympathetic Guardian journalist, Cobber was asked about the allegations of sexism, and she said she had been called incompetent and believed that wouldn't have been said if she were a man. Now, even the interviewer, who seems pretty much on Cobber's side, confessed that she reckoned Cobber probably would have been called incompetent even if she was a man. Doesn't sound quite so bad anymore, does it? But why would Cobber be called incompetent even if she was a man? Well, under Cobber, Haringey Council had spent £40,000 of taxpayers' money to swan off to a property fair in Cannes and sell their land to multinational developers. Cobber had failed to properly consult local residents on the plans. How many times do we hear this when it comes to these sort of proposals? Consultations rushed through and poorly advertised. Now, I think incompetence is giving Cobber the benefit of the doubt, right? Due to the culture of local government, particularly around housing, perhaps Cobber didn't know any better. The alternative is, she was deliberately running the council badly, as she really didn't have her local residents' interests in mind. She was much more interested in selling off council assets to make a quick buck, while at the same time clearing out a slum, regenerating a whole area of Haringey by kicking out local residents instead of helping them. As one old woman who had lived in the area her entire life put it, "We're not worth anything, are we? We're being treated with utter contempt." Who's going to stand up for this woman? Certainly not her local Labour council. She's going to be kicked out of her flat. The new flats that brought in are going to be unaffordable for her. She's going to have to leave her community. What could she do? Well, she could vote Tory, but they have the exact same policies. And time and again we saw this, up and down the country, local people attempting to exert the slightest influence on their representatives are denigrated as troublemakers and bullies. The social media messages and affiliations of everyone involved is sifted through by an establishment press desperate to find any controversial statement, any sign of aggression, and to use it to discredit the group in general. Now, it takes a lot of people working collectively to stand up to power. And so if you think that one individual over a lifetime is likely to say something slightly controversial, or that was perhaps more acceptable at the time and isn't now, and you think it's unfair to ruin an entire career on that basis, what do you think about a group of thousands of people being subjected to the exact same scrutiny? At the end of the Guardian article, there is a correction, as in the original article, the left-wing councillor brought in to replace one of Cobber's colleagues was stated to be a man, when in fact the councillor was a woman. Now, this may have just been a mistake by the journalist. It's a simple typo, she, he. However, much of the article was at pains to frame Cobber as the victim, as a female councillor subjected to bullying, pushed out of the party by a cruel, macho mob. As if the argument I've just put out wouldn't be enough to convince most people that this project was wrong. Why did Cobber defend it to its death? Why did she resign over it? Well, we'll never know, because she resigned, as she said, due to sexism and bullying. And if you're worried about Cobber and her now ruined political career, then don't be, because she wasn't that attracted to it anyway. 3 months after resigning, Cobber was given a job with Pinnacle, a housing management group owned by a private equity firm which just happened to be one of the 3 groups that was bidding on the Haringey project. So it worked out for Cobber in the end, as it often does for people who toe this line. Getting back to RLB, should she have been fired? In an ideal world? Yeah, sure. It was a stupid comment. It shows a real carelessness when it comes to discussing an issue that is both sensitive to Labour supporters and has been used by bad faith actors to discredit the party for the past 5 years. But in an ideal world, could you name a politician that shouldn't have been fired at one point or another? Well, Jeremy Corbyn naturally, but apart from that, we see time and again politicians who have made much more incompetent decisions go completely unchallenged. The decisive factor is how much the party leadership is willing to back someone versus the public pressure / media pressure for them to resign. In this case, Starmer's decision to get rid of RLB before there was even a chance of a campaign against it to form is unfortunately entirely consistent with a number of other decisions he has made to move away from the movement, or perhaps as he'd see it, moment, of Corbynism. And this is deeply worrying for a party that has spent the last 5 years trying to overcome the game-playing quagmire of Westminster politics. Moderates assume that they can never be the aggressors. They do everything in moderation. They are calm, rational, pragmatic compromisers, not wild-eyed extremists led by crazy doctrine. They are like you, out there in normal land, away from the Twitter sphere. And yet, there is nothing pragmatic or compromising about Britain's housing policy. When Johnathan Pie started out, the joke was that after whittling off the ridiculous arguments that he was forced to make as a member of the media establishment, he would then do an off-air aside, giving the reasonable counter-argument that everybody was thinking but nobody was saying. Increasingly though, Johnathan Pie seems to be one man's hot take on the latest political developments. And I wonder if that man is Tom Walker, the actor that portrays Pie. Regardless, he sounds more and more like the media commentators he used to satirise. Please comment, share, like, because if you don't like this video, then that means that you don't like this video. And so I'd have to ask you why you don't like it, and therefore please leave a comment.